Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully y'all are having a wonderful day today. So I thought that I would talk about some boxing here today. And if you're newer to the channel, I talk about a multitude of sports on this channel. Hopefully all of you enjoy it when it comes down, and I certainly enjoy all the support that I've gotten over the past year. I really highly appreciate it from all you guys, no matter what you're here for, whether it be about the football conversations or the boxing conversations, or the tennis conversations. Those are probably going to be the main three sports that I tend to talk about, because those are the three main sports that I follow the most. Also MMA. MMA is a sport that I tend to follow pretty closely as well. So, it is what it is. But anyways, for those of you overall that have recently watched some of my tennis videos and are wondering when I'm going to post more about that, I probably will post more about that next week, because of course the Olympics are going on, and Mr. Novak Djokovic, of course, is still in the tournament. And if he ends up winning the gold medal, that, of course, is going to have to be talked about, because then that will mean that he's very close to, having the Golden Slam, which hasn't been done ever since 1988 when Steffi Graf did it. So that's a very special accomplishment right there. But we'll see what happens there. So, it is what it is for that. But today we're going to be talking about a little bit of boxing. Now, Canelo Alvarez has accomplished quite a bit of history throughout his whole entire career, but he's been especially accomplishing a great amount of history within the past couple of years, and especially this year, because his main goal this year was to become the complete unified champion at 168 pounds. One thing to notice overall about my channel is that I like to review certain videos, certain channels, certain media outlets, no matter, whether they just be a YouTube channel or actually like, a mainstream one like ESPN First Take or Fox Sports News, something like that, I like to review certain videos because I like to kind of get down on certain narratives or propaganda that certain people like to spread. And when it comes to sports especially, it's not really any different from, or not a great amount difference from, say, politics or a certain amount of other things. The media, at the end of the day, they're going to try and spread a certain narrative. The majority of media, no matter if you're watching a YouTube channel, no matter if you're watching the news, or no matter what the hell you're watching, the majority of the time, they do have a certain narrative that they really are trying to push. And of course, that can lead to bias, and overall, that can also lead to a certain amount of propaganda and false narratives. I've seen it with a certain amount of athletes. I just recently talked about Novak Djokovic and how I think overall a certain amount of people try to bring up false narratives about him and his career. Well, Canelo Alvarez overall, even though the mainstream media, when we talk about, say, ESPN and Fox Sports News and those guys aren't really attacking Canelo Alvarez. In fact, the mainstream media, they treat Canelo Alvarez pretty well, because Canelo Alvarez is the main golden goose in boxing right now. But when we talk about certain YouTube channels, which I would also count as so-called media, just a different type of media, these guys call themselves new media or the LDBC. And one thing we know about the LDBC and new media is that they do have certain motivations, all right? And a big part of their motivations is their racial motivations. They have a great amount of racial tension, and I've probably never seen another sport like boxing that has this amount of racial tension and amount of probably, racism, I guess if you want to call it when it comes down to it. But boxing probably has the most amount of racial tension that I've seen out of any other sport, period. At least out of any other sport that I've covered or out of any other sport that I've personally watched. And with the LDBC and new media, they overall have been trying to tear down two fighters within the past couple of years. Two fighters overall that were named as the #1 pound-for-pound fighter on many lists. One of those fighters was Vasyl Lomachenko. They don't tear him down as much right now because he's not in the same power position that he was a couple of years ago. Because, of course, he lost to Teofimo Lopez in that match last October. But now they have even a bigger target to worry about, and that's Canelo Alvarez. Canelo Alvarez not only is the #1 pound-for-pound fighter in my book, he also is the most popular boxer out there, and he probably is the main cash cow, and probably overall is the main golden goose. And the LDBC and new media, they just can't have that. So it is what it is. So anyways, for those of you overall that have recently heard, Canelo Alvarez and the Caleb Plant deal, I believe it recently broke off. And apparently the reason why it broke off, at least according to Caleb Plant and the PBC, apparently Canelo Alvarez's demands were just too overbearing when it came down to it. And a certain amount of people are now saying that Canelo Alvarez somewhat priced himself out. At least that's certainly what the LDBC and new media are going to be saying. Because once again, they don't like Canelo Alvarez because he does not have the complexion that they like. So it is what it is. Anyways, let's see what our good friend AKHi TV has to say here. Let's see what he says. Let's tune in.
Breaking news came out that Canelo Alvarez versus Caleb Plant negotiations collapsed due to Canelo Alvarez turning down $40 million plus pay-per-view revenue, Mexican TV rights, and his own sponsorship from Hennessy, etc., etc. After all...
Well, I don't know if Canelo Alvarez actually turned this down. Now, maybe you're saying that because you're trying to insinuate that Canelo Alvarez priced himself out. But I don't know if Canelo Alvarez literally actually turned this down. I don't know if he actually said, no more on this deal or no mas. I think that he stipulated his demands in the PBC and Caleb Plant. They were not happy with it. So actually, if we're talking about someone turning a fight down, it actually sounds like Caleb Plant in the PBC turned this fight down.
All of Canelo Alvarez's demands was accepted. Shockingly, he still ended up turning...
I don't believe overall that all of his demands were accepted. Now, the main demand that apparently seemed to be problematic was the one overall that Canelo Alvarez stipulated, and he said that even if Caleb Plant ends up getting injured or ends up getting sick, Canelo Alvarez overall can get a late replacement opponent and get the same amount of money that he would as facing Caleb Plant. But if Caleb Plant, if he ends up getting injured or sick or something like that, or excuse me, if Canelo Alvarez, if he ends up getting sick or injured or something like that, Caleb Plant has to wait for him. And I can see why some people overall would see that as problematic, but to me, it's not too out of the ordinary. Here's the bottom line for me. Canelo Alvarez is an A-grade fighter. He's not just any ordinary A-grade fighter. Canelo Alvarez is the face of boxing. And you're not going to get Canelo Alvarez in your stable unless you offer him something that he's going to like or if you give him his money. And listen, I don't think that Canelo is just fighting just because of money, but I do think overall that money, of course, is a big deal. Boxing at the end of the day is a business. So it is what it is.
Down his highest payday to this day to fight Caleb Plant for Undisputed, which is extremely shocking to hear, since old media and the fans placed the blame on Caleb Plant from day one automatically, dismissing the fact that Canelo is the ultimate diva. Therefore, if you may wonder,
saying that Canelo Alvarez is the ultimate diva, I wonder if Floyd Mayweather Jr. also was the ultimate diva because he ordered some of the same demands. Now, certain demands overall that to me seemed a little bit over the top or to me seemed a little bit diva-ish. Like I remember Miguel Cotto, and Miguel Cotto, he doesn't really come across to me as an overly diva, person. Miguel Cotto is a pretty, simple, quiet guy when it comes to that. And when I say simple, I mean overall, easy to work with. That's what I mean. But when it comes down to it, like Miguel Cotto, I remember in the negotiations against Sergio Martinez, even though Sergio Martinez was the main champion, I believe he was the Ring Magazine champion in the middleweight division, Miguel Cotto said overall that he was going to be the one to come out last and not Sergio Martinez, which of course, if you know anything about boxing, that's not usually what happens because Miguel Cotto was not the champion at the time. It's usually the champion or the favorite that ends up coming out last. That's what usually happens. But Miguel Cotto said that if you want the fight to happen, and if you want this big payday, and that's the reason why Sergio Martinez accepted those terms, Miguel Cotto said, I come out last. Now that to me, overall, maybe you can argue was a little bit diva-ish. And of course, that's not super duper over the top. That's not really, something too bad. But what Canelo Alvarez overall is asking for, I get why a certain amount of people, they may say overall that, that's a bad thing and that why would the PBC accept that? Well, here's the thing. Like I said, Canelo Alvarez, he's not any ordinary fighter. He's not even, any ordinary A-class fighter. Once again, Canelo is the face of boxing. And he wants his guaranteed money. That's the bottom line.
Since Canelo received everything he asked for, then why did Canelo Alvarez turn the fight down? I'm going to reveal the answer to that question later on in this video. For the meantime...
Well, the answer that the LDBC and new media, what they're trying to propose is that it was a multi-fight deal. And that Canelo Alvarez is avoiding David Benavidez and Jamal Charlo and That's the narrative overall that they're trying to propose. Could it be over a multi-fight deal? It could be. I don't know when it comes down to it, but I haven't really heard any details on that. Now, new media and the LDBC, the people that don't like Canelo Alvarez, they've been trying to spread this narrative for a very long time that Canelo avoided David Benavidez and Demetrius Andrade and Jamal Charlo and blah, 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 all this stuff for a very long time. And don't get me wrong, I think Canelo Alvarez realizes the threat of those guys, and sometimes he hasn't seemed too keen on fighting some of them. But when it comes down to it, Canelo has been consistently, especially over the past few years, been fighting A-grade competition. So, it's whatever. That's just the way that I look at it. It is what it is. That's why I've never really been too hard on Canelo Alvarez because, in my opinion, he's pretty much been fighting some fighters that probably are in the same league, if not above, Jamal Charlo or Demetrius Andrade or some of these other guys. But, it's whatever.
Tom, Caleb Plant told ESPN, quote, his bark is bigger than his bite. Canelo was offered the highest guarantee of his career. He was set to make $40 million plus Mexican TV rights and his Hennessy sponsorship. No problem. Let's fight. We gave it to him. Then they wanted upside of gate and pay-per-view revenue. No problem. Let's rumble. It was always agreed that it was a title unification. No rematch for either fighter. Toward the end of negotiations, they asked...
And there's certain people overall who are complaining about the rematch clause. I don't really have a problem with the rematch clause because this is something that has been going on for years upon years upon years. I mean, literally decades. The rematch clauses have been instilled for a very long time. Floyd Mayweather Jr. is one of those fighters that always stipulated rematch clauses. He did it against Marcos Maidana. He did it against any fighter that he fought. Really, when it came down to it, at least, when he was the A side. That's the bottom line. But remember when Floyd Mayweather Jr., when he fought Oscar De La Hoya, he couldn't stipulate all those demands. And that's what a fighter does overall. They have to give in to these certain demands when they know they're not the A side. Alright? That's the bottom line. Once again, Canelo Alvarez, he's not just some ordinary A-grade fighter. He's the face of boxing. Canelo Alvarez is the LeBron James of boxing right now. He is the face of boxing. That is the bottom line. Alright? So it is what it is.
For a rematch when they lose. No problem.
And I know certain people overall will say, well, Canelo Alvarez, he said overall that he wanted $40 million guaranteed, even if he doesn't end up facing Caleb Plant when it comes down to why would the PBC agree to that? Well, I'm just going to tell you this. If we were to talk about football, for example, you have certain people overall that you're going to have to make exceptions for. And say if we were talking about Aaron Rodgers and the Green Bay Packers, and they give him a contract when it comes down to it. Now, if this were, say, I'm trying to, like if this were a Demetrius Andrade, then I would say that it probably wouldn't be worth it. But if you have a once-in-a-generation type of fighter that you're going to have to try to make a deal with, and that's what Canelo Alvarez is. Canelo Alvarez, once again, he ain't no ordinary fighter. Canelo is a once-in-a-lifetime fighter. He is the face of boxing today. Okay? Like I said, if we were talking about football and we were going to talk about Aaron Rodgers, they have a certain amount of money overall that you get if, you play the full time. But let's say that person gets injured when it comes down to it. Say if Aaron Rodgers gets injured, he gets a certain amount of guaranteed money within that contract. But they can't give those type of contracts to everybody. And certain football players have been mad about that for a very long time, but it is what it is. They can't give guaranteed contracts to everybody. It's kind of the same thing in boxing, in my opinion. Once again, if this were like a Demetrius Andrade, or say a Billy Joe Saunders or something like that, I would understand. But this is Canelo Alvarez. Canelo Alvarez overall, here's the bottom line. If you want Canelo Alvarez, you're going to have to give in to his demands. And some people, they can say it's diva-ish all they want to. Maybe you can call it that if you want to. But you're going to have to give in to his demands.
You can have the rematch as well. I just want to fight. Caleb Plant told ESPN he agreed to his side of the deal 2 weeks ago with, quote, no arguments about money or any stipulations, even when it came to the size of the ring. Canelo Alvarez got his wish.
And apparently that also was a big deal. I remember when Canelo Alvarez said that he wanted a 20 by 20 foot ring for Billy Joe Saunders. And many people were saying Canelo hasn't gotten any better. At least the people who try to tear him down, once again, the LDBC and new media people, they tried to say overall, well, Canelo Alvarez, he really hasn't gotten any better, you know, because why would he need a smaller ring? a 20 foot by 20 foot ring really is not, it's not that bad at all. That's pretty good size. Now, would it be better maybe to have a 22 by 22 foot ring? Sure. And that's eventually what they agreed on. But a boxing ring sometimes can even be smaller than 20 feet by 20 feet. 20 feet by 20 feet really, in my opinion, is really not that big of a deal. Now, maybe it would have been a bigger deal had it been like, you know, 18 feet or something like that. Or even smaller, but that's not what it was.
A 22 by 22 foot ring. Plant also agreed to it, stating that Canelo had...
And a 22 by 22 foot ring is, you know, that's pretty much perfect size. There's nothing wrong with that.
Other ridiculous requests. Quote, one that is absurd. If I get injured or sick, then he gets a late replacement for the same amount of guarantee money. But if he gets sick or injured, then we gotta wait for him. We are at 7.5 weeks from the fight. We have lost valuable time that should have been spent promoting and drug testing.
At University of Phoenix, you can take online classes anytime, day or night, because they're
for a fight of this magnitude. I question whether legacy or money is their real motive. We have been waiting.
Well, I think that he wants both. Now, could it be overall that Canelo Alvarez, that you know, that a multi-fight deal was offered and Canelo Alvarez says, no, I'm not going to do that because I want to be a free agent, or overall I want to have control over my own career? That's fine. I don't really have a problem with that because Canelo Alvarez, he has more options than a Caleb Plant. Now, if you did like what a Deontay Wilder did and turned down that Anthony Joshua contract, that DAZN deal, then to me that would make no sense other than you didn't want to fight Anthony Joshua because Deontay Wilder apparently wanted Anthony Joshua so bad, and you're only in one weight division. You can't fight anybody else that would have been a better fight than, say, an Anthony Joshua. That's why I got after Deontay Wilder for that. And I'm sure a certain amount of his fanboys are going to be on my ass. That's okay. It is what it is. When it comes down to the overall, Canelo Alvarez, though, however, has more options. And if he doesn't face Caleb Plant, he said overall that he would be interested in Dimitri Bivol or an Artur Beterbiev. Those are two fighters that I believe don't fight with the PBC. So the problem is this. Canelo, he's sort of in a similar situation to what Aaron Rodgers and what LeBron James are in their, at this point in time in their career. All right, they're major cash cows. And if you want them to be on your team, if you want them overall to be on, you know, on your team or within your stable, you're going to have to offer them something that they like. You have to give in to their demands. All right, it's just like at college if they're trying to groom a great high school prospect. You have to give in to a certain amount of their demands. It is what it is. Certain people will say that it's very diva-ish. You can call it that all you want to. But Canelo Alvarez is the face of boxing. This isn't just some dude. All right, Canelo Alvarez is the face of boxing. All right, and I'm not trying to be a fanboy here or anything like that. Like I say, you know, I'm not a fan of any of these athletes, so I can keep a logical and objective perspective. But if you want Canelo Alvarez to be within your stable, if you want him to fight your fighter when it comes down to it over at your PBC stable, if you want Caleb Plant to get the opportunity to face probably the #1 pound-for-pound fighter in the whole entire world, you're going to have to give in to his demands. That's just the bottom line.
Waiting for him to get done with his wedding, shooting his TV show, his golf tournament, and now have tried to give him everything he wants and more to make this fight. I'm more than willing, able, and ready to fight Canelo Alvarez on any date. Those are the real facts. And if anyone has something to say differently, we have the paperwork to prove it. End of the quote. So what's going...
I don't have a problem overall with Caleb Plant saying that, but, or, you know, some people will say, well, Caleb Plant has the paperwork, so obviously he can prove that Canelo's being a diva. Well, once again, I don't have any doubt that Canelo Alvarez is demanding this. I don't have any doubt about it whatsoever, but I really don't have a problem with it. I mean, some of the things that Canelo Alvarez is asking for, they're really not that out of the ordinary. So, it's whatever.
Going on to all of the Canelo fans, Does Canelo want to...
And a certain amount of these people who apparently allege that Tyson Fury faked the coronavirus, and who the hell knows, I don't know when it comes down to it, but what I'm going to say is this. Actually, for those of us overall that's watched the UFC, if you didn't hear the news today, Amanda Nunes, who is probably the best female fighter out there right now in the whole entire MMA scene, Amanda Nunes actually just tested positive for COVID-19 today. I keep on telling people that you can get the vaccine. It's still not impossible to test for it. There's multiple people out here, even in my area, when it comes down to where they've gotten multiple vaccines and they've still tested positive for the virus. So, it is what it is.
Payday. Payday. Canelo won a payday. Might as well go fight Jake Paul. I told you all on my previous video. The fact that ESPN did not reveal why the fight collapsed, that pretty much told me money was not the issue. Old media and all of the fans tried to paint the...
What seemed to be the issue was that PBC, or Caleb Plant, that they didn't want to pay Canelo Alvarez the $40 million unless the Caleb Plant versus Canelo Alvarez fight was secured. They didn't like that Canelo Alvarez put that stipulation out there. That's what the problem seems to be to me. But it is what it is.
Narrative that Caleb Plant is scared and he's just looking for a payday. But
I don't know if Caleb Plant is scared, but what I am going to say is this. I'm not sure if the PBC like that demand. What I'm going to say is this. If you want Canelo Alvarez to face your guy, you're going to have to give in to that demand. That's the bottom line.
Knew that wasn't the case because it's PBC on Fox who's hosting the fight. It's one thing if DAZN were hosting the fight, then it would have semi-made sense since it's DAZN who's offering the money. But for this case, it's PBC on Fox, Al Heyman, who's actually putting the money up. Which you best believe, Al Heyman is not going to lowball his own fighter in Caleb Plant. Therefore, when old media was running with that narrative, I told you guys, there's a small possibility.
Yeah, I don't think Al Heyman is going to lowball his own fighter, but maybe Al Heyman didn't like that demand from Canelo. You know, and it is what it is. If he doesn't like that demand, he doesn't like that demand. He has the right to turn it down, but then Canelo Alvarez has the right to turn down the fight as well, or he has the right to say, okay, well then I'm moving on. That's the bottom line. So if you want to say that Canelo turned down this fight overall because of that demand, maybe you could, but it sounds more to me like the PBC ended up turning this fight down because they did not like that demand. So, it's whatever.
But I don't think that's the case. Even when it came to the ring size, where I knew Canelo was going to complain about that, Caleb Plant also accepted his demand there. Therefore, why would Canelo Alvarez turn down $40 million guaranteed, plus gate and pay-per-view upside, Mexican TV rights, keeping his own sponsorships, Hennessy, etc., 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 with the...
Well, he's basically saying overall that I want my $40 million guaranteed whether Caleb Plant is in this fight or not. Now, PBC, once again, maybe they didn't like that, which is okay. It's whatever, but once again, if you want Canelo Alvarez to fight your fighter, or to fight on your network, to fight on your stable, you're going to have to do that.
Rematch clause, picking the ring size, all of these DIVA demands by Canelo Alvarez that were accepted.
All these quote-unquote DIVA demands, but Floyd Mayweather Jr., when he gave a certain amount of these demands, and I don't have a problem with Floyd. I don't have a problem with any of these demands or anything like that. But if Deontay Wilder, let's just bring him up for example, if Deontay put a certain amount of these demands, let's say overall that Dillian White called him out, which actually he's been doing for years, but it is what it is, you know, but of course maybe you can argue that Dillian White didn't want the fight as bad as he said, you know, it's whatever, we'll talk about that some other time. Bottom line is this overall though, let's say Dillian White and Deontay Wilder, they were getting, you know, setting up a fight next. Let's just say overall that happened, and Dillian White said overall, well, you know what, I just can't give in to these demands. You know, Deontay Wilder wants this guaranteed money, and he wants a certain ring size, and blah, 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 blah. You know what new media and the LDBC would be saying? Guess what? Deontay Wilder's the A side. You're going to have to give into it. That's what they'd be saying. And they'd be right. So it is what it is.
All for Canelo Alvarez to turn down the offer. The answer is simple. Plant revealed it in his statements. Quote, "We are at 7.5 weeks from the fight."
Now you see that coming off? See, this reveals a new layer of skin. I gotta make sure.
we have lost valuable time that should be spent promoting and drug testing. Keywords: drug testing for a fight of this magnitude. End of the quote. Caleb Plant already accepted.
You can still have random drug testing, I believe, within the final several weeks. So, it is what it is. I mean, some people overall, they think overall that Canelo was doing this because of steroids. I personally think that the PBC, they didn't like that last demand that Canelo gave them. And overall, they moved on. It is what it is.
All of Canelo Alvarez DIVA demands 2 weeks ago. And yet Canelo turns down the offer as recent as the day.
And these guys, of course, are alleging that Canelo Alvarez is on steroids. Do I believe that Canelo Alvarez, that there's a high possibility that he's on steroids? I think it's very possible. I think it's very possible that Canelo Alvarez is on steroids, but it doesn't really bother me all that much because, to be quite honest with you, most of these damn fighters, most of these athletes in general are on steroids anyway. That's just my personal perception of it anyway. So, it's whatever.
Day before yesterday, when he had all of his demands accepted already. What does that tell you?
Taking away the 6-month ban, Canelo will always be labelled as a drug cheat.
It don't take a genius to figure out that Canelo Alvarez is still cycling off his combuterol intake. That's why.
It's possible, but once again, I've already said this, and certain people overall, they get after Canelo Alvarez for the steroid use, and I'm not saying that steroid use is a great thing or all this other stuff. I'm not saying that, steroids don't deserve a suspension. But what I'm going to say is this, steroids to me really are not that big of a deal. A lot of people, of course, are going to heavily disagree with me on that. The reason why I don't think they're that big of a deal is because if you actually were to bust open a doctor or overall these certain, people that actually give these fighters these steroids or these high-level supplements that are illegal, these high-level PEDs, you would find so many athletes, so many fighters that are on that list, that are on that secret list. All right, there's certain lists here and there that break out about certain people being on steroids. All right, like LeBron James, I believe overall actually ended up being on one of those lists, but people completely ignored it. So it's whatever. I believe Kobe Bryant might have also been on the list. Now, of course, that's basketball, but just to give you an example, a lot of these athletes in general are on steroids anyway. So it is what it is.
Canelo Alvarez is stalling, walking away from negotiations, and then most likely he's going back whenever he's done with his cycle. That's the only time Canelo is going to accept the fight. For the people that don't know, when Canelo Alvarez failed 2 drug tests for steroids leading up to the Gennady Golovkin rematch, it was due to a miscalculation on his behalf. Canelo was under the impression if he was in Mexico, VADA wasn't going to come to knock on his door, since usually he only gets tested when he comes to the States. However, Gennady Golovkin was highly suspicious of Canelo, so he informed VADA to do so, and that's when Canelo got busted, on day 1 when VADA knocked on his door. And just to debunk...
Yes, and I do believe that he was taking PEDs willfully. I have no doubt about that whatsoever. A certain amount of people may disagree. Of course, the Canelo superfans, they may make excuses. They may say overall, well, it was bad meat. I don't believe it was bad meat at all because this is something that has been appearing for many, many years for many Mexican fighters. This has been an alleged excuse for them many, many years. And the amount that he had in his system, for sure, I believe Canelo Alvarez purposely took steroids. I have no doubt about that. But once again, steroids to me, they're really, I mean, once again, I'm not saying they're a great thing. But most of these fighters, most of these athletes, period, are on steroids anyway. At least a lot of them are. So
the desperate excuse by Canelo, such as contaminated meat. He ate contaminated meat in Mexico from a taco truck. Then, if that's the case, Canelo should have failed a drug test for every time he ate contaminated meat from Mexico. Every time he ate a contaminated taco, then guess what? He should have failed for a drug test every single time. I know Canelo didn't start eating contaminated tacos leading up to the Gennady Golovkin fight. Either you eat contaminated meat or you don't. Plus, it's 100% Canelo cheated because even if you eat contaminated meat, there's another substance of steroid that's found in the contaminated meat that wasn't found when Canelo failed for the drug test, which proved Canelo straight up took steroids. You know what they say. Once a cheater, you will always be a cheater. So if you may wonder why Canelo is stalling for time, it's because he's still cleansing his body. Don't y'all find it ironic that Canelo, as of late, on all of his latest fights, he only signs the fight like 4 weeks before the actual fight. He stayed negotiating for months, but only accepts the fight 4 weeks before the fight. He did that with Kovalev, Caleb Smith, Avini, now Caleb Plant, etc., etc., etc. So if I'm Caleb Plant, I wouldn't fight Canelo Alvarez unless he's taken a minimum of 2 months of random drug testing, Olympic-style drug testing, USADA and VADA, because we dealing with a professional cheater. Therefore,
Well, once again, I do believe Canelo Alvarez overall has done certain steroids, but we'll see what happens.
for the September date is not going to cut it, which shouldn't really matter to Canelo since Canelo haven't fought on that date for 3 years. And last but not least, Caleb Plant should take a page out of Billy Joe Saunders' book. When Canelo didn't give Billy Joe Saunders exactly what he wanted, Billy Joe Saunders put out that he's going to be fighting Demetrius Andrade, a fighter that Canelo Alvarez have been ducking.
I would love to see Caleb Plant versus Demetrius Andrade. I would personally love to see that fight. That would be the only A-grade fight that both of them have ever had in their career.
For 7 years to this day. That's when Canelo Alvarez started to negotiate with some more sense in order to please Billy Joe Saunders. So Caleb Plant should do the same thing by announcing that he's going to fight Jamal Charlo or Benavidez, fighters that Canelo Alvarez have been running from. That would be the smart thing to do. Because if Canelo is playing that hard to get, even though Caleb Plant has...
Well, it would be great if Caleb Plant truly wants that Canelo Alvarez fight, and if he believes that Canelo is avoiding him. Same with David Benavidez, same with Demetrius Andrade, same with Jamal Charlo. They should probably fight each other. Now, a certain amount of people, of course, are going to get after me, and they're going to say, well, are you saying that they don't deserve fights with Canelo? I'm not saying that. But if you believe that Canelo Alvarez is avoiding you, then you should trap him in a corner. And you should get some of the bigger fights out there that may be available to you. Because apparently David Benavidez is willing to take on all comers. Jamal Charlo allegedly wants that Caleb Plant fight. We'll see about that. Jamal Charlo has always proven to me, at least, that his bark is a lot bigger than his actual bite. But we'll see what happens. Those fights would be interesting.
It's the last missing piece of the puzzle. That's because Canelo knows Caleb Plant only wants to fight him, which that's a Caleb Plant mistake. Therefore, to all of the Canelo Alvarez...
That's a Caleb Plant mistake. That's a Caleb Plant mistake. But when Demetrius Andrade and Jamal Charlo, when they just call out Canelo Alvarez and don't want to face anybody else, certain fighters of a certain complexion that you try to protect when it comes down to it, you just blame Canelo Alvarez. Interesting.
As fangirls, aka the decafs, who's going to flood my comment section with emotional comments such as, you hating on Canelo.
AKHi, I don't think you have the right to call anyone a decaf because you're one of the biggest dipshits out here that I've personally seen. But it is what it is.
If that's the case, go ahead and point out exactly what I said. That's hating. Go ahead, point out exactly what I said you disagree with.
Well, here's the bottom line, AKHi. I don't disagree with everything that you're saying. But the bottom line is this. You're obviously very much trying to tear down Canelo Alvarez. You also tried to tear down Vasyl Lomachenko for the past few years. It's very obvious why you're doing it. It is what it is. You're on the LDBC and new media bandwagon train, which is a cult when it comes down to it. And overall, Canelo Alvarez does not have the right complexion overall for you guys to be the #1 pound-for-pound fighter. So it is what it is.
Because if you can't disagree with any of the facts I brought up with your emotional opinion...
Because like I said, I don't disagree with everything that AKHi TV said. And could this be a steroid issue? Possibly. Who the hell knows? But when it comes down to the overall, it sounds like to me that PBC, they did not like that type of demand. But it is what it is, and they just moved on. So it's whatever. You know, it is what it is. But when it comes down to the overall, we'll see overall if this fight happens a little bit later on. I hope it does, but it looks like more than likely it's probably not going to happen at the end of this year. Probably happen sometime earlier in the middle of next year. But we'll see what happens.
Then that means the truth is burning your emotions.
But like I said, AKHi TV, it's very clear overall that he doesn't like Canelo Alvarez compared to these other fighters. Same with the LDBC new media, because they try to tear down Canelo Alvarez on a daily basis. And when Jamal Charlo or some other fighter that they try to protect does something similar, they won't mention it as much. All of a sudden there's crickets. So that's how you know overall that they just don't like Canelo Alvarez.
Soul. So you either let the truth set you free or burn your emotional soul. It's always facts over emotion over here.
Right, AKHi, but you're a very emotional person, you know, which is why you've jumped on the LDBC new media bandwagon. You're a very racially motivated person. You have a lot of racial tension. It is what it is. Anyway.
Which is exactly why all the Canelo Alvarez fans will be the first to click on my video in order to hear the truth that they hate but also allergic to. They always have the most nonsense to say, but ironically, they always the first one here. With that being stated, drop your thoughts in the comment section below, subscribe below, and click on the...
Anyways, that's really about it for today. I just thought that I would review that video. Anyways, we'll see overall what happens with Mr. Canelo Alvarez and overall the Caleb Plant situation. Could it be that Canelo Alvarez is under some sort of PEDs? Very well could be. You never know when it comes down to it. But it sounds like to me that the PBC, that they did not like this stipulation, they did not like this demand, and they seem to move on. Which is fine, whatever. But then Canelo Alvarez is going to move on as well. And who knows, we might just see a Dimitri Bivol or an Artur Beterbiev fight later on this year, which, to be quite honest with you, this is my opinion. Caleb Plant, like I said, to me, in my opinion, at least when it comes to Canelo, is probably the biggest threat to Canelo Alvarez out of any other 160, 168 pounder. The biggest threats to Canelo actually are Dimitri Bivol and Artur Beterbiev. Those are the big 175 pounders. They're very athletically gifted when it comes down to it. They have decent boxing craft, and we'll see what happens. Those would be excellent fights. I'd love to see those fights. But we'll see where Mr. Canelo Alvarez heads next. Anyways, that's really about it for today. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you all later.